Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Dr. Jessica McElprang, and I'm a senior lecturer in the Department of Psychological Sciences at Swinburne University of Technology. I'm delighted to be here with you this afternoon to tell you about an assessment in which we upskilled undergraduate students to build infographics in health psychology. On behalf of my collaborators and I, we respectfully acknowledge the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, who are the traditional owners of the land on which Swinburne's campuses are built in Melbourne's East and Outer East, and also where I'm presenting from today. We are honored to pay our respects to their elders past, present, and emerging, and to recognize our connection to Wurundjeri country, history, culture, and spirituality through these locations. We strive to ensure that we operate in a manner that respects and honors the elders and ancestors of these lands. And I know y'all are scattered right across Australia. Indeed, we acknowledge and respect the traditional owners of the lands across Australia, their elders, ancestors, cultures, and heritage, and we recognize the continuing sovereignties of all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander nations. Today, I'm going to give you a bit of an overview of why we opted to bring an infographic into health psychology. I'll tell you a bit about the development of the assessment, what we've done to evaluate it thus far. I'll show off some of our students' work and talk a bit about some of the limitations of the evaluation and some of the future directions we're continuing to refine this assessment. So we've all seen infographics, and our students have too, so they feel quite relevant to students. We know that effective communication about health and health behavior has important implications for individuals, families, and communities who are supported by health professionals. And infographics are great because when done well, they communicate a large amount of evidence-based information in a concise and visual way. They're commonly used by medicine and public health professionals to present information to patients and to support health-related decision-making. And increasingly, academic journals are asking researchers to produce visual abstracts to accompany their research articles. So all of this said, when done skillfully, infographics can amalgamate images, icons, figures, and text in a way that makes information easier to understand and can also overcome language barriers. We thought quite a lot about whether it was worth abandoning a traditional research paper, which is what had previously occupied the space now taken up by the infographic in our health psychology unit. But when we considered the skills that we wanted to impart to students, such as increasing their digital literacy and building their visual communication skills, both of which are Swinburne graduate attributes, we knew we needed to bid farewell to the traditional paper and try something different. So by bringing in an infographic, we hope that we would also be giving students skills that might improve their employability. When I talk about digital literacy or digital fluency, I'm talking about these three domains: technology literacy, information literacy, and critical literacy, all of which were touched on in one way or another in this assessment. And it's our hope that by building student skills in these areas, that they're being prepared for the workforces of the future where employers expect their employees to be digitally fluent. And we want our students, our graduates, to not just survive in an ever more digital world, but to really thrive in it. So we decided to go with this assessment in psychology of health for some of the reasons mentioned, the relevance to health careers, which can take a variety of different forms among psychology graduates. Psychology of Health is an online undergraduate unit that runs in year 3, and it's delivered twice per year during summer and during winter. Each run of the unit includes 40 to 50 students. This assessment involved 2 main components. The first was an article critique. Students were required to select 3 peer-reviewed articles and to summarize and critique those articles, and also to make clear how they intended to use that article as one of the foundational pieces of evidence for their infographic. The second component was the infographic itself, which was accompanied by a 500-word written submission that was a project reflection. That project reflection included two components, which I'll touch base on in the next slide. This very busy graphic shows the various skills that we wanted students to build or to hone in the course of this two-part assessment. There in blue, you'll see that select and critique relate to the article critique. So students had a lot of latitude in the topic that they chose to tackle for this assessment. They could choose any health risk or health protective behavior discussed in the unit. And they also needed to select a target audience. This was important because if you're developing an infographic on something, say, binge drinking, the presentation might look different if you're gearing that toward adolescents than an older demographic, for instance. And so based on those choices, they then needed to collate 3 articles, which they summarized, critiqued, and again, identified how those articles were going to form foundation for their infographic. And while it seems like, oh, just 3 articles, that's not so much, that's true. But the process of narrowing to those 3 was important because they really needed to be identifying strong literature and strong literature that was relevant to their target audience. Here in red, you'll see the domains that were relevant to the infographic itself. We wanted them to apply foundational communication design principles in creating the infographic, to be tailoring their design, both in the messaging and in the visualization to their target audience. We wanted them to have fun playing a bit with software and getting to know other ways that programs could be used in the hope that that would also build some of their confidence. And lastly, we wanted them to practice visualizing data, which certainly has relevance for psychology graduates beyond this assessment, and something that we learned that students don't really feel that confident in doing. The 2 areas in green relate to the project reflection. So in addition to reflecting on what they learned from the assessment, and that might have related to the topic or the process of creating an infographic, we also wanted them to relate those learnings to their professional self and professional practice, however they defined that for themselves. These students have a wide range of different goals and are at many different stages in their sort of the lifespan and with what they're aiming to achieve after they complete their degree. And we wanted them to be able to think about how these learnings related to whatever their individual goals were. The other component was that explain bit there. We wanted them to put in words what the key messages were that they were intending to convey in their infographic. Admittedly, sometimes that wasn't especially clear in the infographic, and this was sort of another opportunity for them to help to fill in some of those gaps to make sure we were understanding fully. To enable them to build the skills that they needed, we created a bit of a tutorial overview and resource roadmap. So they had some special tutorials for this assessment, the first being the article critique overview, which touched base not just on the nuts and bones of that assessment, but also working to sort of brainstorm and workshop topics and target audiences. We then introduced them to infographics. This is where the design communication principles were introduced. How to use color, text, and organization to present a useful infographic. And that was informed by consultation with our colleague in design, Dr. Belinda Polovich. Next, we had an Adobe Spark hands-on workshop. And that was run by one of the Adobe digital coaches at Swinburne. We're fortunate to be Australia's first Adobe Creative Campus. And so we've got a lot of really great supports around this, this type of skill building for students and for staff. We presented them with a whole bevy of independent learning resources, videos, templates, etc., so they could spend some additional time building skills that were relevant to their infographic and what the vision that they had in mind. And then we provided them with a synchronous peer sharing session where they could come into Collaborate Ultra and be split up into breakout rooms to swap drafts of their infographics with their peers and get some real-time feedback. Marking criteria was a bit of a trick to develop. We didn't want to weight the visual component too heavily, but it did need to be a part of the assessment. And in particular, they were integrating some of the principles that they had been educated about in the context of the tutorial. So this is what we've come up with thus far. Now, I'm delighted to show you a couple infographics that were submitted in the first run of the unit. So these are just beautiful by a couple of students, Anna Pender and Heidi Spence. And I think they've just done a really nice job integrating color, facts, etc. Now I'll tell you a bit about the assessment evaluation. We do have pre-infographic and post-infographic survey data, but the initial run of the unit, the pre-survey data were only for QA purposes. So I'm going to be focusing here on the post-assessment data. So far, in the 2 runs of the unit, summer 2020 and winter 2021, 84 students have completed the infographic, and of those, 44 students completed the post-infographic survey. Of those, 84% were women. The vast majority were mature age students who started their degree over the age of 21, and most of them aspired to health careers, primarily the goal of becoming a psychologist. In looking back on the assessment, we're delighted to find that most students agreed or strongly agreed that infographics were a useful way to present health information, a relevant skill for psychology graduates, and also that most students thought that it might improve their employability. So I think some of that helps to showcase some of the buy-in that we got from students in engaging in this process. Here's a quote from a student in the most recent run of the unit. I enjoyed being able to use my creativity. I learned a new relevant skill that I can use in the future. Awesome. We also asked students a number of questions about their sort of perceived knowledge as a result of the assessment. So pretty much everyone agreed that they had more knowledge on the topic, which you would expect, but some of the qualitative feedback from students helped to flesh that out a bit. So here's an example. I had to delve into a lot of other information to know what was relevant and what wasn't. This led to a comprehensive understanding. So they were really engaging with the literature in a way, teasing out what was and was not important. The vast majority of students also felt more confident communicating in a visual way. Even though this was an area where students actually want more skill building, it did help to increase their confidence, and they enjoyed the process of being creative and thinking about how to express their messages in ways other than words. They also felt more confident in tailoring scientific information. And I think that that's valuable because whatever profession that you choose to take, you're often having to communicate across audiences, whether that be audiences in groups or as individuals. And thinking about how you present information in a way that's going to be heard is a critical skill for psychology graduates. Overall, students felt quite confident by the end of this. They could create an infographic, which was good to see. And if given the choice, 82% of students would prefer to create an infographic over writing a traditional academic paper. Needless to say, the infographic is here to stay. Some of the limitations of this evaluation include the modest participation rate, the lack of matched data from the initial run of the unit, and that mature age students and women were overrepresented. So we don't know if students from younger cohorts might see this assessment differently. Students want more parameters on topic selection. So having too many options was apparently just a bit too much. So we're looking at how we might refine that for the next run of the unit. They want more opportunities to critique infographics. The one student suggested that we might even critique one infographic in every tutorial just to keep them really connected to that piece of the assessment. They want more tutorials on data viz, and so that's something that we'll be doing next time around, and more opportunities for both synchronous and asynchronous peer feedback. So we've implemented an email swap for those students who aren't able to make it to synchronous swaps. So a little bit more celebration of student work. These are from the most recent run of the unit. These are infographics by Tabby Ward and Eloise Bangerter. Again, just absolutely gorgeous, so well done. And we'll be publishing some of the exemplars in our Psychological Sciences Research Showcase in 2022. Really quickly, a couple final things. It's delightful to see that students tended to enjoy this. Again, not all, but the vast majority seem to, and to feel really engaged in the process. And one question we asked them was, when they reflected on their infographic, what was one word that described how they feel? And I'm beaming as I share that in addition to students feeling quite engaged and using this as a different type of an opportunity to synthesize evidence-based information, they walked away with something they felt proud about, excited about, and creative, and even thankful for the learning that had come from the assessment. So all that said, thank you so much. It's such a pleasure to be here with you. I'll be sharing all of this information with you via a link in the chat. And also I'd like to acknowledge that development of this assessment was funded by an Adobe Innovation Grant at Swinburne. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.